It's Chris, Liege Games. So we've all had great games. We've all had bad games. But sometimes the challenge and the difference between an amazing game and a great game, or a game that stays in your collection versus a game that leaves your collection, is the rulebook, right? And through my various travels in terms of games coming in and out of my collection, I've run across several games that I have said, wow, this is a pretty good game, or wow, this is a great game. And oh my gosh, this rule book makes it a headache, or this rule book just makes it like I just don't even want to try and get it played because it just creates more questions than solves them. Or it just raises the learning curve too much for me wanting to get it to the table as often as I probably would otherwise. So let's talk about 7 games that I think suffer from this, even though I think at the same time, they're really good games. Let's do this. So number 1 on this list, and again, these are in no particular order, but this is number 1 on the list because I think it's the most probably controversial on the list. Nemesis from Awakened Realms. Everyone talks about how good the story is of this game, the storytelling that this game can provide. No one argues that. But when it comes to learning this game, when it comes to getting it played, when it comes to the overhead and the actuality of it, the rubber meeting the road is not quite as good as it should be for the 16th ranked game of all time on Board Game Geek. Right? I mean, expectations for the 16th ranked game do not have, when you go over to the forum section here, 1.3 thousand, 1,300 threads on how to play or questions or clarifications on a game. Granted, obviously there are a ton more people playing this game than other games. That's not a great sign that things are crystal clear the way they should be in the first place. I mean, this is Alien the board game. No one, again, doubts that. No one questions that. It is what it is. And again, it's a great game. But I have heard way too many comments about, okay, not understanding this, or having to figure out this, or having to go look up this. I mean, there is nothing more irritating in the middle of a game night when you're trying to teach a game and you come across something that is just not explained anywhere in the rule book, or that is very easily deduced. And imagine trying to sort through, now obviously with a search function it's a little easier, 1,300 threads of, has this been addressed? Where is this being addressed? How is this taken care of? And for a game that a lot of people love, that's one thing that I think definitely could use an improvement. So here's to hoping that its sequel, Nemesis Lockdown, is going to be that much easier to a reading and comprehension and practicality standpoint. So that's number 1. Number 2 is a little bit along the same lines. Again, Batman Gotham City Chronicles from Monolith. This re-theme and extension of the original Conan energy system had absolutely top 100 Board Game Geek game all over it. The miniatures looked fantastic. The scenarios and the mission-based objectives with the variability and the depth in terms of the characters and the choices and the gear was outstanding on the surface. But then season 1 happened and people got it, and the rulebook was atrocious. So atrocious that they have had people who backed the game do a considerably better job. And I'm not just talking about like someone like Esoteric Order of the Gamers who does this thing on like a full-time basis where, you know, taking the rule book and making it that much better. But no, just like a lot of other people, because more people than not could not understand or could not get it played. Or played to the extent that they wanted to because of how much of a mess it turned out to be. Now, recently, there's been an announcement. Season 3 is going to be coming up shortly. And they have hired people, I think Paul Grogan even, to go through and produce a adequate, satisfactory rulebook. Which, again, it somehow took till Season 3 to make that happen. Which, I guess, the bottom line is, they're doing it. So I give them props for realizing it and doing it. It's just a shame it took, 4 going on probably 5 years by the time that's going to be delivered for it to actually happen in the first place with this, terrific, aesthetically pleasing Batman mission-based game. So there you go. Number 3, this one personally strikes home a little bit. I still have my copy of Machina Arcana 2nd edition. I have the 3rd edition expansion coming. But this, as an underrated dungeon crawler, it's just a cool horror steampunk game with modifiable weapons and items and equipment and cool monsters and standees even. So the price point is so much better than if it was a miniature game, but it doesn't get the acclaim, I think, because of those issues. It holds it back. Now the third edition, that's a whole nother issue. 3rd edition, well, although again, just like with Batman, is supposedly getting another rulebook revamp, so hopefully it will be that much better when it comes out around with the latest expansions as well. So here's to hoping for that. Number 4, Mythic Battles Pantheon. Now again, the rulebook is not horrible on this, but similarly to Nemesis, what it should be versus how good the game is thought of in the first place, the gap is too big there because it ends up making it too hard to get to the table as a game that more people should be aware of and more people should be able to get into, but don't because of the slog of overhead and because it just is not as well organized and put together from that standpoint. This is another one that could really use like an official how to play video and an official rulebook upgrade, especially with the latest Mythic Battles Ragnarok coming out, just to clarify things, to completely smooth over things, to just completely overhaul it from that standpoint. And I wish they would do that as well, because this is probably, if not one of, the best asymmetric 1 versus 1 guys on a map battler in that sense. Now, I'm not talking about things like Star Wars Rebellion or War of the Rings, but like I choose my army, you choose yours, you draft them, however you want to do them. It's up there or near the top. The fact that it is just, again, the learning curve is just so much there that it just doesn't get to the table nearly as much as it should and doesn't get the acclaim that it nearly deserves. Because again, I think the barrier to entry on these games is not necessarily always price, it's time. If I have to spend 100% of the regular time extra learning a game like this in the first game, it's not going to make me want to play it again as much or relearn it again if I have to down the line if I don't play it right again. And then it's going to sort of almost, sometimes in these situations, if it isn't perfect, leave a little bit of a bad taste in my mouth. And I say that as someone who loves a lot of these games. I do. And I have like everything from the first Mythic Battles, and I'm getting a bunch of the stuff from Ragnarok. And so I'm very happy with the game itself, but I'm not as happy with the ability that I have to get it to the table in the first place because of some of those overhead rules. So hopefully that will be better as well with second editions. Now, are you seeing a theme here? Second and third editions, and most of these are crowdfunding. So it definitely is, I will flat out say it's definitely a crowdfunding issue. As a side ramble here, I think a lot of people on crowdfunding think that they can edit their own rulebook in-house and have in-house people test it and go through it. The problem is you can't. In-house people are already more familiar with it than anyone outside of the house will be. And it's sort of like, have you ever asked a kid to write the instructions of how to make a sandwich? Go do that or watch that video online and see how different it is, and how specific you actually need to be as opposed to what we just naturally assume sometimes that people are going to know and understand, especially in this case in like a rule book. So that's why Mythic Battles. Next up, similarly, again, another crowdfunder. This is from Blacklist Games. This is Street Masters. I really like this game. The concept of this game is amazing. The combinations, the decks, the stats, the hex-based system, it just works really well. And it's been really popular on crowdfunding. But again, the gaps in the rule book left a lot to be desired in terms of just how things were interacting, what happens in this scenario, what happens in that scenario. Again, as sort of a marker of things in these situations, when you go over to the forums, almost 50% of the comments, the threads in the forum are rules questions. And again, that was probably the biggest thing that ended up with me selling my copy, was because I love the system. I loved how they did things. Sadler Brothers did a great job with developing this system, but the rule book let it down because I was playing and I'm like, oh, okay, so this just happened. What do I do? This just happened. What do I do? This just happened. What do I do? And there's only so many times of that can you deal with that and go, oh yeah, not a big deal. I'll just figure it out. Ah, no big deal. I'll just figure it out. No big deal. Well, then, if you have to do that 3, 4, 5 times, at some point you're going to mess up one of those. And how big of a deal can it be when it actually could significantly change the way the game should have gone or could have gone, because you're going to reach a breaking point too in terms of how much or how drastically it's going to affect things. So again, awesome game, awesome system. Sadler's did great. The gap again between what it should have been and the parts that were missing to just clarify it. And I'm sure, some of the later expansions or iterations have hopefully cleaned that up as well. But for me, it was, played a couple times, 3, 4 times, and I couldn't get all that stuff answered very thoroughly. So, I said, I've got other stuff that I can get to the table easier. So I'm sorry. I'll see you later, Street Masters. Number 6. I just was playing this in the past week or two. Imperium. Now, this is Legends from Osprey Games. And that was the big notation on this thing. This is an amazing game. Amazing 1 to 2 player deck builder. Just fantastic. Doing things in ways that deck builders haven't done it before. And I agree. But the rulebook is a slog. The rulebook, it doesn't address half the issues. The rulebook is just not right in a couple places. I was watching... Before I was playing, I watched Paul Grogan's video on Board Game Geek of like a playthrough, and he's got 2 of the designers on the chat who he has obviously talked to before, who he has obviously read the rulebook through before, who has played it through before, and is messing up rules, not left and right, but a fair amount. And if that's happening to him with experience, with interactions, with discussion... I was like, holy cow, what am I supposed to do? That didn't inspire me in the confidence, especially after I read the rulebook in the first place. And I agree, there are some absolutely fantastic looking mechanisms and combinations and achievements and the asymmetry between the factions and the nations in this game. But I'll be frank with you, it's sitting on the counter right now, and I'm a little bit trepidatious because I really don't want to go through the frustration of trying to frustrate myself for the sake of trying to experience this great game. Because if I'm more frustrated, it doesn't matter how good the game is, my frustration is going to win over. And again, maybe that's a little bit on me, but again, this speaks to a little bit of a rule book that probably wasn't done as much by people who were blind testing. And I think that's the whether it's retail or crowdfunding, that's where you need to have people do it from. And that's, just across the board in the hobby in general. So, man, I want to love this game. I want to love this game. I'm not getting rid of it yet, but it's going to be a back and forth for a little while now, I think. I'm going to have to play it 2, 3, 4 more times to kind of get a good sense of things. Because I definitely didn't do that after the first couple times. And, last but not least, Warehouse 13, the board game. I love the IP. I loved the show. The trader mechanic that they've got going on here, the dice use, the items, the tie into the IP itself is just fantastic. But the rulebook, again, it just lacks. It lacks the depth and the explanation and the examples to make things make sense, especially when you've got this many different things going on and you've got sort of the field side of things and then the warehouse side of things and then sometimes the trader side of things. The comment, and I've referred to this several times in previous other videos, but this is the game it's in reference to, is that when I posed a question somewhere online, not from the designer's great, but as a fellow person who had learned the game previously, because I had saw that they had played it, and I reached out to them, and I commented on wherever they had posted, and I said, hey, I'm really having some trouble with the rule book. Is there any tips or suggestions? And they're like, well, just watch the how to play video. And I should not, and this is, again, a disclaimer for any game. I have no problem with people that do these for games. I think it's a great resource because we all learn in different ways. Some of us are audio, some of us are visual, some of us are combinations of both. But I should be able to read through a rule book and know how to play a game. And I should not have to watch a how to play video. Especially if I wasn't waist deep in the hobby. Can you imagine someone picking up this game who's not waist deep in the hobby and loves the IP from a sci-fi standpoint and said, I want to play this game. This looks awesome. This is my favorite IP from sci-fi. Oh my gosh, this is cool. And then trying to read through this and then, basically, being turned off to the hobby because this was their introduction to it and they couldn't figure out how to play because they weren't you know, in the hobby, going to Board Game Geek, knowing where to go for a how to play video. Like, that's what rule books need to be able to prevent. And that's why rule books need to be so good. And that's why this is such a big deal, even though, again, this is a very, very well thought of game, even though it's flown under the radar. But again, that's one of the reasons I think it's flown a little bit more under the radar and not gotten as much exposure. And I say that as a fan of it too. So there you go. Again, like, I don't think there's a whole lot of dispute that are very well thought of and that really people really like them. But it doesn't matter how good a game is. If you've heard me say this before, and if you haven't, well, here you go. If I can't get it played, it doesn't matter if it's the best game in the world. And that's true whether I just don't have the time, I don't have the group, or if it's too much of a slog, or the rule book just isn't good enough to make it, you know, to make the barrier to entry easy enough to entice me on a frequent basis. Whatever that means in terms of frequency. Because I'd like to play all of these games a lot more frequently. So, you know, here's to hoping that I can. And some of these improvements hopefully will allow that. So, there you go. What is one of those games for you? Now, obviously, I can think of other games that aren't as well thought of or as good, that have notably or notoriously not as good rule books, but that's obviously not what this video is either. So, what were some games like that for you? These were mine. Let me know what you think in the comment section. Let me know what was that for you. And, you know, whatever else you want. You know, it's just a rambling day anyway. So, I don't really have anything good to ramble about here at the end, though. Oh, kid was playing Mario, Super Mario Brothers Deluxe on Switch. Got like to the second or third level, died, and then it made him start over from the beginning. So he was like super depressed, and he's like, I'm quitting. I'm quitting. I'm going back to Pokemon Shield. And he was like obsessed about that game before we rented it. So I think he was kind of disappointed. And I'm going to have to try and probably beat it with him now so he can get a little bit further and feel a little bit better about himself in that sense. Because I think he was pretty demoralized as a 7-year-old. So, okay. I did have a ramble there at the end. Okay, you got me. Stay classy. See you around. Have a great day. I'll see you later, Street Fighter.